Well, the first thing we can learn is how not to do it. And in fact, somebody said that the best thing that Job's comforters did was to keep their mouths shut, which they did for 7 days. The problem came when they opened their mouths. So it's a wonderful story which speaks profoundly to Christians in suffering and has done down the age. But of course, Job's comforters are legendary for being no comforters at all. And at the root of their bad comfort, their bad advice, was a false understanding of God, bad theology, if you like. Because they argued that God is just, you're suffering, Job, therefore you must have done something very bad. And Job, interestingly, follows a little bit similar logic, because Job says, well, yes, I'm suffering, and I haven't done anything bad, so God is unjust. So both are actually dealing with faulty premises. And of course, the people in the story can see only a part, whereas we're, if you like, in the place of God or with God, because we get the overall picture. And when we're facing suffering, like Job, we're in the place of Job. We're in the story. We're not detached from the story like when we read Job. So ultimately, Job is questioning God and he's wrestling with God. And actually, that's okay. When God at the end appears to Job and answers his questions, well, he doesn't really answer them, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, when he appears to Job, he says, to the three friends of Job, you haven't spoken well of me as my servant Job has. Now, you might think God would rebuke Job for his questioning and his doubts. He doesn't at all. No. So the question then that I think Christians face out of Job is, one, how not to do things like Job's comforters, and two, that we won't understand suffering fully until we meet the Lord face to face. And Job is very helpful, because Job keeps saying, I want an advocate, I want a mediator, I want someone to represent me to God. Because actually when God speaks to him, it's in a way, if I may say this reverently, unsatisfactory. Although Job repents in dust and ashes, God just asks him lots of questions. So Job is in a way should leave us slightly unfulfilled, and what it should point us to is Christ. Because Job didn't know, but he was yearning for someone who was coming, who would be a mediator, who would be an advocate, who would be an intermediary, who can bridge that, in a way, then unbridgeable gap between God and us. The other thing I think we can learn from Job is that I like to think that when Job got to heaven and met God, he had a nice surprise, because Job keeps complaining, if only someone would write my words down in a book. And of course, that's exactly what did happen. So I think Job would have then had a slow smile dawn over his face as he realized that actually his suffering was for a purpose, was redemptive. And not only that, has been helpful for Christians for thousands of years later. So when we go through suffering, and this is a mystery, and I don't want to be glib here, but that is part of God's purpose, and God is working his purpose out, even in the most awful suffering that we may go through. But many times we will only understand how that was part of God's purpose when we meet the Lord. So the key question is really, do we trust God? Which Job does, by the way. In the end, yes, he does trust God.